Hello and welcome. We're here live at Adobe Live, and I'm your host today, Sarah Stewart. We've got some lovely guests with us, and I'll let them introduce each other really quick.
Wait, am I introducing you?
Why don't you do that? Yeah, introduce each other. That'll be more interesting.
I feel like I want to pretend I'm you. I'm not going to do that though. So this is Shannon Finnegan. She's an amazing, incredible artist. She's disabled, and she incorporates her disability into her work. I like to think she's also sort of become a designer, a graphic and visual designer through her artistry.
Great.
And this is Liz Jackson. Liz is an incredible advocate for getting disabled people involved in design and really thinking about disabled people as drivers of design rather than just recipients of design. And also just does a lot of great thinking about how design can be better.
Yep.
Nice. And so these are some wonderful ladies we've got today for World Interaction Design Day. And so we've got a whole day of events. If you've been tuning in, then you just watched Lindsay and Kat talk about some amazing stuff about how to be inclusive. And I think we're showing the schedule on screen. And so, yes, we had the welcome earlier today. We then had the interview with Kat Small, hosted by Lindsay. We're here now with Liz and Shannon, hosted by myself, Sarah. We also have a creative challenge today, so if you're tuning into those, please keep track of them and continue working in XD. It's always easy to pick up XD, so play with that when you get a chance. Later, we're going to be doing some hosting with a couple other people. We got Kevin and Jeanne. We then have another interview with George, hosted by Michael. I'll be back again with Megan for some more design work, and Amelia and Sharon will be later with Rumenia. I think that's how you pronounce it. Great. So it's an action-packed day. This is probably the busiest day we've had at Adobe Live in a long time. And we're in New York City, so we have a different time zone going on, which is a lot of fun. And so we're here today. Please participate. Maybe you guys can get started by letting us know where you're tuning in from and why you're here today. And feel free to ask questions as we go along. And so I think you understand what we're going to be talking about in this interview. With these introductions, we've kind of introduced the topic at hand. But let's jump into it. And I'm going to just start by talking to both these ladies about what the term disability means to them. Maybe that's a good intro.
Do you want to go first?
No, you go first for that
one. Well, we were speaking before, and I felt the easiest way to explain it was to say there's two models of disability. There is the medical model, which states that we are disabled by our bodies, and then there's the social model, which states we're disabled not by our bodies, but by the world around us. And I ascribe to the social model, and because I believe that we are sort of disabled by the world around us, that disability is in its very essence designed.
Gotcha. And I was ignorant to this. I was asking some questions before we got on stream about this topic and making sure that I'm not asking inappropriate questions, because it's tough to know what is okay to ask, because you want to know the answer to a question, but you want to make sure you're not stepping on anything that's been maybe sensitive for both of you your whole lives, and I'm not aware of it. And so
I think there is a lot of fear of disability, especially around language. And historically, that's sort of trended toward euphemism. So they don't want to say the word disability, but so instead they say differently abled or special needs. But if you're of the social model of disability, the way that you feel is that by talking around disability, it increases the stigma of an identity that we're incredibly proud of. My friend Lawrence Carter-Long created a Say the Word campaign, which is just to get people saying the word. But I've actually found that there's a sort of a fun practice that kind of eases the discomfort, which is if you're having a hard time saying the word disability, just drop the F-bomb before it, and it makes it a whole lot easier.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Now I know the secret.
Yeah. And I think for me, just kind of going off of that, and especially going off of Lawrence Carter-Long's work, I think disability is the political category. It's Americans with Disabilities Act, so I think of that as like a very kind of powerful identity. But also that within the disability community, people feel very differently about different language, and so just because you talk to one person with a disability and they say, oh, this is kind of how I like to talk about it, doesn't mean that you have kind of a pass for everyone you're going to interact with.
Right, everyone's different, everyone has their own experiences. That makes a lot of sense to me. And I think you guys have some amazing projects you want to share, and we're going to be sharing them throughout the stream. please, if you're participating in chat, ask questions as we go along, because you also have a chance to win just by chatting with us and asking questions. A hardcover notebook from moo.com, which is really great. I have used them for business cards in the past, and I think they have some amazing products, and you can take some notes in that maybe in the future while you're watching more streams. But I think this is maybe a good time to maybe pull up a project you're most proud of that you want to share and share with the rest of the community.
Yeah, you go first.
Okay.
I feel like Shannon's stuff is so good.
And so maybe you can start by talking a little bit about what this project is and why you're sharing it.
Yeah, I think I'm going to start out by sharing a project I did called Anti-Stairs Club Lounge. This is a project that I created for a really inaccessible exhibition space. It was created for the Wasaic project, which has their exhibition space is a repurposed grain elevator, so it's 7 floors, and there's no ramp or elevator access above the ground floor. And so I wanted to create a project that addressed that, and so I created this space called Anti-Stairs Club Lounge. That's basically just an enclosed room on the ground floor. This gives you a better sense of what it looks like inside the space. There's seating, there's chilled seltzer, there's kind of a selection of reading materials. But you can only get access to the space if you check in at the front desk of the gallery and kind of sign a little slip of paper that says, I'm not going upstairs. So the lounge is exclusively for people who are staying on the ground floor.
Daniel says he loves the font. I think the font's really neat. It really pushes like home the idea and message you're doing here.
Yeah, well,
you're actually wearing it as well.
Oh yeah,
oh,
yeah.
Really?
This is a T-shirt that has a little kind of anti-stairs motif on it.
I think they can see it on stream. Yeah, you can see the anti-stairs.
Yeah, I mean, I wanted the space to feel kind of like a really interesting space, something that had a lot of kind of interesting details, and so kind of throughout the space, there's different elements. This shows like a little clock face that I made specially for the lounge, stair-themed clock face. Also, all of the books and reading materials in the lounge are kind of things that have been helpful for me in terms of thinking about my identity as a disabled person. This is the top of the mini fridge with an invitation to have a seltzer.
Nice.
There's also a little candy in the lounge. I use a lot of humor in my work. I think that's something, my experience with disability is that humor comes up a lot. Sometimes you just kind of have to laugh at a situation.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of times non-disabled people treat disability with kind of like the utmost seriousness. And so something that I am doing a lot in my work is kind of, bringing that humor in. So this is just kind of like a jab at stairs in general. The higher you climb, the farther you fall.
I like it.
And then just kind of some other details of the space. This is a print that I made. This is kind of a phrase that I've been thinking about a lot, is kind of shifting kind of my disability from something that was embarrassing or something that I felt ashamed of to kind of really a place of power and something that I really am taking ownership of and feel excited about.
Great. We have a question from Darune who's asking if these are personal projects. And so maybe you can talk a little about where these projects are coming from.
Yeah, so my background is in fine art. I'm primarily consider myself an artist. I think, as you can see, I'm using a lot of kind of design in my work. And so that's something that's important to me. But this is a project that was something that I proposed to the exhibition space, and then they have a commissioning program, so they were able to provide some support in terms of funding the creation of the project.
Awesome. I did not know that, so that's really cool. We got a lot of people tuning in from different locations: Costa Rica, Hyderabad. I saw Canada, I think, which is really cool. Where are you both from, actually? Are you from around here? Really, New York City?
Oh, originally, I was born in Detroit. I grew up between Cleveland and Akron, Ohio, in a town called Medina.
Oh, wow, okay.
But I've been here for the last 12 years.
That's a good amount of time in New York City. That means you're local, right?
It's like I can't leave it, so like it makes me feel a little bit local sometimes.
Yeah.
I'm from Berkeley, California.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So I actually lived in New York City for 5 years, and I just moved from San Francisco to Asheville 2 months ago.
Oh my gosh.
So I've lived in both places. It's pretty cool. Okay, and so I know that you have an organization that you work under, Liz. Maybe you can talk a little bit about your organization.
Yeah, so I created an organization called the Disabled List. And it's, to understand why I have an organization called the Disabled List, you sort of have to understand how I found myself into this space. And long story short, I woke up 6 years ago, fell out of bed, landed in the hospital. When I got out, I needed eyeglasses and a cane. And so for me, it created this question, which was, why do I have so much choice with my eyeglasses when I don't with my cane? And so the reason I started working in the design space was because I wanted more choice. I wanted to have objects that I could choose from. But what that ultimately evolved into was the creation of this organization, the Disabled List. And we, instead of focusing on objects at this point in time, we're focused on creating pathways into design for disabled people. I think what the last 6 years have taught me is and I often say disabled people are the original life hackers. We spend our lives cultivating an intuitive creativity because we're forced to navigate a world that isn't built for our bodies. And so, and yet we're not entering design fields. I'd even go so far as to say that design positions us as recipients rather than drivers of design. But what history has shown us is that our ingenuity actually has been known to change the world. We created the iPhone touchscreen, we created the electric toothbrush, we created cruise control, curb cuts, our ingenuity led to the bicycle.
Wow.
You see it time and time again, and so what I'm trying to do is really bridge that gap and shift perception so that disabled people start to feel comfortable entering design fields and can find careers in this space. And so that's what the Disabled List does. It's a curated list of creative disabled people who are available to consult, and it's we have a program right now. It's a fellowship called WITH, which partners creative disabled people with top design studios and creative spaces.
What an opportunity for top creative design studios.
Yeah.
I mean, based on everything you just said, there's so many amazing pieces of technology I had no idea were invented because of these limitations.
Yeah. Well, I think it's interesting because I think oftentimes people sort of view it as a limitation, but I think the thing is if we can show both disabled people and organizations that our perspective is so highly valuable, I think it's opportunity.
Yeah, again, I think the words are really tough in this space because the word disabled is even, to me, interesting that we use it, but maybe you can talk a little bit about your background, Shannon.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I went to kind of like a liberal arts school for college and studied art there. I did a lot of printmaking and drawing, and you know, I've been disabled my whole life. That's always been kind of a part of what I'm thinking about in my artwork. And then kind of over the last maybe 3 or 4 years, I've been thinking about how to kind of make that more explicit in my work and kind of speak to people more directly about that. I think something that's been important for me is just that, you know, when I look around at pop culture and media and kind of representations of disability, I really don't see anything that feels connected to my experience. Like the portrayals of disability are so one-dimensional. It's usually about either kind of pitying someone with a disability or kind of applauding them for quote-unquote overcoming their disability. And I think my lived experience is much more nuanced than that. You know, there's days that are really hard, there's days that are really great, there are interesting things, there are funny things, you know, and it's, that's just not something that I see a lot. And so something I've been thinking about in my work is not only how can I represent that experience to non-disabled people, but also how can I show other disabled people kind of like how great we are, because I feel like that's something that I've learned not from mainstream media, but from other disabled people, from their writing and their work and their things like that. So
yeah, it seems like both of you are probably role models for a lot of people in the community to be able to see women who are so powerful and empowered by everything they're doing.
I often sort of, I think that both me and Shannon have found ourselves in a position where we are able to kind of get our work out into the mainstream. But even as that, like in my work, I feel such an obligation, not an obligation, I feel such a desire to express that our work isn't possible without the sort of radical grassroots efforts of people in the disability community. And so it's really like so much of what I do is I strive to demonstrate how badass we are, and it's not just the few people that you may hear from here or there, but it's really the entire community. It creates a foundation on which we can thrive.
Yeah.
And so I hope sort of throughout this hour I can shed light at least on a few people.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you want to maybe mention some people, or?
I have a project that I can show that, based on that, the disability history PSAs.
Yeah, do that.
Yeah.
So the disability history PSAs, this sounds interesting.
Yeah, I think kind of going off what Liz was saying, there's a lot of like really amazing kind of moments in disability history that I think aren't always recognized. And so this is a project that I've been doing that's just kind of like mimicking or kind of drawing like a search engine homepage and encouraging people to kind of look up these kind of key moments. So the 504 sit-in, it's the longest occupation of a federal building in protest history, and there's all sorts of amazing details about this protest. There's really good photos of it. That's one, and then this is another one that is I think a little bit better known, but this was a protest that happened during the passage of the ADA by National Adapt, called the Capitol Crawl. That also, yeah, I think I'll just let people
Google these and find out more information. I think this is a really nice aesthetic choice too, to just keep it a simple search screen and have the term and search term be the center of focus here.
And I love talking about National Adapt. I think I hope you'll look them up. I think their work is incredible, and even yesterday they were doing some just. They're on the front lines. But I look back oftentimes to the formation of National Adapt, which happened really in the 1970s. And you have to understand that sort of leading into this period of time, society didn't have a lot of access to disabled people. Disabled people had been in institutions. And so we reached this time in the late 60s, early 70s, where disabled people had finally found their way out of institutions and into the real world. And so one of the things that happened is as disabled people entered the real world, they started striving for access. And National Adapt in particular, there was a gang of 19 people. And the thing that they started doing was, and it was very radical at the time, is they were advocating for bus lifts on buses. And so you have to understand that they looked radical, right? They were not previously seen in society, and they had radical ideas. They expected access, and they went about it in a very radical way, which is that they parked their bodies in front of buses and in intersections.
Wow.
And they demanded this shift. And at the time, I think the perception was that people wanted to look away. But slowly over time, those radical ideas became normalized, and people did start to have this expectation that buses should come with bus lifts. And then over time, buses did start to come with bus lifts. And then when the 1990s rolled around, it really was, the bus lifts actually got written into the Americans with Disabilities Act. But there's something really important to kind of look at in the scope of this work, which is that all of the very radical work that National adapted, by the time it was written pen to paper into the Americans with Disabilities Act, as soon as it was written into law, it was actually disabled people that were written out of the process. And this thing that we'd fought so hard for was actually something that was done for us. And so I oftentimes kind of like to look at the scope of disability history to see how can we sustainably advocate for our own inclusion, because it oftentimes seems to me that by advocating for our inclusion, we are actually also advocating for our exclusion. And so, it's these histories that really do form the work of people that follow.
And I think as amazing, every day I'm grateful for the ADA, because I was born kind of just as ADA was implemented, and so I feel really lucky to have those protections of my rights. But I do think there are misconceptions around that in terms of people thinking like, oh, if I'm meeting ADA regulations, then I'm done with access. I've figured it out. I've checked all the boxes. Access is just much more complicated than that, and it is something that we have to do collaboratively and in an ongoing way. And I think that's kind of part of what you were getting at is you need to continually have disabled people involved in whatever project you're doing, so that you can continue to kind of understand that nuance. And
yeah, I think, and like Shannon was saying, it doesn't just create a minimum standard of which people never then feel a desire to kind of go over, but it also sort of implies that there's only one way, and so it's a reduction of creativity, and it also makes you think that you can do it without disabled people, when in reality, when you sort of create access with disabled people, like you might achieve access, but you're not going to create something that is that says something that speaks to a community, that speaks to a person, that creates desire or delights. And so I think by really turning to disability culture, you can create
really cool stuff.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like just more than what you're able to do by looking at a list of requirements.
Yeah. And I think, and it's not about just like, can disabled people get into a space, but like, do we want to be there? Like, is it something that appeals to us culturally and we feel like it's something that we want to be a part of?
And how do we impact that space?
Yeah.
I think people don't realize, like, when you invite us to the table, you're probably not going to get what you expect.
That is a great segue into something I do want to bring up. When you talked about your disability, you talked about the fact that you had more options with your glasses than your cane.
Yeah.
And I know that you were working with a particular company on getting some creative products out in the world.
Yeah. So this all started, I had this brilliant idea one day. So it's interesting because I'm doing everything I can to sort of get away from my origin story, and yet like I also can't. So what happened was when I was in the hospital, I was like happy as can be. I remember the bed like went up and down really high. And like my friends were coming and they were bringing me Shake Shack, which is cheeseburgers for people that aren't in New York City. And I was just like, I was loving it. And people thought I was in denial, and people thought that I would want to fix my body. And the thing was, is I never cared so much about my body. But when I got out of the hospital, that's when it hit me. It hit me when I realized that I couldn't choose a cane. And that was my struggle. It wasn't that I wanted to choose my body, it's that I wanted to choose my identity. And when I lost the ability to choose my identity, I fell into a deep depression, which lasted for about 8 months until I found a beautiful purple cane that changed my life. And I remember I'd been watching the Girl with the Dragon Tattoo movies at the time, and so I decided I wanted this badass alter ego. And so I became the girl with the purple cane. So the first time I got my cane, so I live at 125th Street. This is sort of maybe not the best way to explain the story, but I live at 125th Street in New York City. And I had my cane and I got on the subway and I would express down to 59th Street because it's just one stop. And there's an indoor shopping center called Columbus Circle. And so I would walk around in there for exercise because it was cold outside. So I got my cane, I got on the subway, I sat down, and this woman sat across from me and she gave me the old up and down, and I thought that she was going to tell me to get better or ask me what was wrong because that's what I'd been getting for the previous 8 months. But instead she asked me, where'd you get your cane?
Awesome.
And it changed everything. And so like I had that sort of extra pep in my really slow step as I was when I got to Columbus Circle, and there was a J. Crew there, and as I walked in, I saw this row of eyeglass frames. And it really struck me in that moment, which was, it's very fascinating. If you get eyeglasses, you either wear them without the prescription, or it's this two-part process. You get them at the store, and then you take them to your optometrist. I was like, why are eyeglasses the thing?
Yeah.
And so that's what I was thinking about when I wandered further into the store. And I had my purple cane, and I looked down at my cane, and I saw this row of T-shirts, and I realized I wanted a purple shirt to match my purple cane. Only they didn't have purple. I remember they had, the two colors that stood out were Kelly green, and then this color that I found sort of innately contradictory, which was neon peach. Like, I didn't know how peach could be neon. And it was in that moment that I realized it's not that I wanted a shirt to match my cane, it's that I wanted a cane to match my shirt. And so I rushed home slowly, and I wrote J. Crew this email, and I said, oh my God, J. Crew, like, you sell eyeglass frames, like, will you sell a cane? And they didn't respond. And then I had this blog, and I was like, I'm going to write them publicly. And so for years, I would write them weekly and monthly, just whenever it struck me, and I would try and convince them to sell a cane. And so how do we pull up this image? So I took over their catalogs. Like I did everything I could think of,
Nice.
and they never ended up selling a cane. And I think it's probably the best possible thing that could have happened, because through that I formed a much broader argument, which is how I got into this space.
Yeah, it's a brand and an identity too, which is really cool. People want to see your purple cane. Is it nearby? Can we possibly show the streamers? Because that would be rad.
Let's decorate the table right here with it.
We can decorate it with the cane. I think that's a wonderful idea.
Yeah. So this is it.
It's pretty
it's actually it's 6 years in, and it's still kicking.
Yeah, it doesn't look like it's been worn or torn. It looks pretty well maintained, well
Let's
taken
see.
care of.
There we go.
Yeah, right in the middle.
Front and center.
I have the same cane that I found independently of Liz.
What were you Googling?
I use a cane in the winter when it's icy, and so I was looking for a cane and I couldn't find one, and I literally Googled hip cane for young person, and eventually found
purple cane.
Yeah, mine is actually black. There are color options.
Oh, gotcha.
There was it was black, turquoise, orange, and purple.
All right.
Yeah, those were the options.
We got some color options. Okay. Yeah. All right. They're doing better, I guess.
But I see people with it all the time. It's really like
it's the one and only.
It's like the Jeep Wave now. Yeah.
It's getting better. There are more now.
Yeah, there's a few other options.
Yeah.
So I guess suffice to say, J. Crew did not respond, did not reply.
No, I'm so curious. Like after all these years, like I still talk about them. Like
seems like a good business opportunity. I don't know.
That's what I say.
Yeah. And I know you're working on a design for a new cane. Is that right?
Yes. So you can pull it up. Yeah. Thank you.
The video.
Yeah. So I guess one thing that interests me, and I think Shannon touched on this a little bit, is there's this presumption that design and disability must fix us or fix a thing for us. And I simply wanted an object that expressed who I was. And so that's what led to this idea, which I'm still working on. This is just the video I made to kind of get started.
I haven't seen this yet, so I'm excited.
I think you have to like lean forward because it's your mic too.
It was 4th of July, and New York City was alight with a luminescence I could not recall in all of my years of living here. Walking along St. Nicholas Park, I found myself disturbing a flickering world of lightning bugs. And it got me thinking about bodies. Were these lightning bugs more alive to me individually or as a whole? I'd just been on the subway, lost in thought of my disabled peers at National Adapt. They had successfully protested the gutting of our healthcare system, but got little credit. I was dismayed by the disconnect between their words and how they were described by the media. To me, they were empowered and free, and yet somehow they were described as bound, wheelchair bound. And so I began to wonder if wheelchairs glowed like fireflies, if the light swelled with their hearts and dimmed when they ached, would you still think they were bound? Or would you finally see wheelchairs as an extension of their bodies? As a cane user, I thought, a glowing cane, that I could do. And that's what Lumina Stick is. Lumina Stick does what canes do, but it does something else too. It reveals. There's a sensor in the handle that haptically pulsates light with the beating of my heart. Lumina Stick is the most intimate expression of my being. And this is the power of disability ingenuity. We don't always need design to make us better. Sometimes we just need design to shed some light.
That is a very powerful video.
Thanks.
And Kevin is wondering if your cane is your magic wand as a designer.
It is. It's funny, and maybe we can go to the other two. So I have, I like to have a lot of fun with my cane. In the winter, I actually tape a ruler to it so that I can measure the snow or puddles. Oh. I walk with the cane. I have some balance issues and stuff, but I'm actually really strong. And so I created these, I collaborated with a company called Walnut Studio, and I created these beautiful leather cane belts. And I mean, it's always so hilarious to me because I ride in strong and then like I hobble away and people are like, what just happened? But again, that's that delight in disrupting assumptions. So that's one way I play with my cane. And then the other is I like to joke that I'm filming a slow action thriller, and so I attach a GoPro to my cane and just sort of walk around. I haven't done anything with it yet other than just film, but it's just whatever makes me laugh. It's that humor and that delight that I think is so lacking in the disability design space that both me and Shannon strive for.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to this video. I want to watch this action thriller.
Yeah, it's going to be real slow.
Nice. Yeah. It's a good movie when it's slow and it builds up properly. So we got a lot of people really appreciating that video. So thank you for sharing. We got Catherine, Camillo, Darnay again. I know Veronica had some really great, insightful things to say about what you guys are talking about.
Yeah, I saw some stuff coming up here that I think both me and Shannon would be interested in addressing, which is the straw ban.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I saw a few people asking about that, and so I wanted to take a chance for us to touch on it.
Yeah.
Do you want to, or do you want me to?
I'll let you take that.
Okay. So what happened was a couple years ago, and I remember being horrified when I saw the image initially, but it was a turtle or a tortoise had gotten a straw stuck up its nose.
It was a video I watched. Yeah. It was
horrible.
Traumatizing.
And what happened was sustainability organizations really galvanized around that image, and they leveraged the power of that image to enact what has been called the straw ban. And Seattle has signed on, San Francisco signed on, Starbucks has signed on, and what they have done is they have begun to eliminate straws from their stores. But the issue is that they never consulted disabled people, and so this has been a loss of access for the disability community. Many of us require straws to simply consume food. And so it's been really frustrating and fascinating to see how we have suddenly been positioned as these sort of like anti-sustainability kind of tortoise haters. I often sort of refer to, but I think even more importantly, it's been a wonderful thing in some ways that's happened because it's allowed the disability community to galvanize around one particular movement, and it's allowed us to create a scenario in which people will start listening to us and believing us. And so I saw it come up a couple of times, and I do realize that this is a design problem, and so I wanted to make sure that it was mentioned.
Yeah, and there's been lots of good writing.
Incredible, yeah.
A lot of good essays from different disabled activists around this topic, and so if it's something that you're interested in learning more about, there's lots available.
Yeah.
I had no idea that it was such a hot topic. For me, it was all about the sustainability that I was paying attention to. And so what are maybe some other topics you've seen come up in popular culture that maybe people aren't aware of has a double-edged sword with some of these movements we're making?
I think like even the idea of like single-use plastics, and you have to also understand that if you really kind of look at the scope of the disability community, it's oftentimes just simply through nature that we are greener than the rest of society, just simply what we have access to and what we're able to afford. And so on the flip side, I remember a couple of years ago there was an orange that had been peeled and it was in a plastic container, I think at a Whole Foods, and all these people chimed in and they said, well, doesn't an orange come in a container? But what they didn't realize was that orange wasn't peeled for them, it was peeled for disabled consumers. And so it turned what is access into a joke. And it happens time again. I've seen it with avocados and sort of other vegetables. And so it's just so fascinating because we're continually being sort of pressed up against the sustainability movement, and much of us are participants in the sustainability movement. And I just sort of wish that people would create opportunity for us to come together and really kind of figure out true design solutions that are truly inclusive.
Yeah, I think including a disabled person would probably benefit sustainability efforts because then you can find solutions for both, as you said.
Yeah.
So again, opportunity, and that's what your organization is helping people do, is work together and collaborate.
Yeah, I mean that's the goal, is to get us a seat at the table.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so we've covered a lot of different topics today. What is the main goal that you have of this stream, and what would you like people who maybe are ignorant to the disability movement, what would you like them to know? What would you like to educate them on while they're here?
You or me?
You.
You keep pointing. I'm like, you have to talk eventually.
She talks after you. She feels more comfortable taking off, right?
I think a lot. I think the thing that I just most want people to understand and hopefully kind of get a feel for us, and I had said something earlier and I don't recall what I said, but you sort of responded before turning to Shannon, you responded back that language is sort of tough.
Yeah.
And it is tough. And it's something that, it's a sort of something that's happening within the community and then also externally. Nobody knows how to speak to us or to speak about us. And what I have found time and again is that it becomes a lot easier if you talk to us and just sort of allow us to kind of shed light on our history, our culture, our politics, our experience, and what we're really striving for. And I think the other thing too is that, you know, in some ways I feel like I have a really easy job. I'm oftentimes invited to speak at events and people are oftentimes blown away by my message. And it's not because I'm so exceptionally talented as a speaker or have something so incredibly original to say. It's just simply for the fact that what I believe is that we all have this moment very early on in our lives where we see somebody who looks a little bit different from us. And we'll eye that person with curiosity until mom or dad yells at us and tells us not to stare. And so we reflexively look away and we don't ever look back. And so what I want to do is entice you to look back, however awkward it is, and to really embrace how much joy and adoration we have of one another, and invite you to also get as much out of us as we get out of ourselves. And I think what that comes down to is not sort of presupposing certain things. The disability community, we tend to find it offensive when people are inspired by us. We want to be seen. The thing that I advocate for on every level is a certain level of mutuality, what happens when we come together as peers. And so how is it that, and maybe this is something you can think to yourself about, how is it that I can enter a conversation with a disabled person and really see them as my equal? And I think that's what both me and Shannon try and do in our work, is we try and disarm you so that, you know, if we can catch you a little bit askew, then we got you, right? And then you're game, like you're down for whatever. And so like I think that's what both of us really strive to do in our work.
Yeah, yeah. I think people just forget that disabled people are like full, complex human beings. Like, you know, we have likes and dislikes and, you know, opinions, and we also have this really unique experience that complicates and adds to a lot of discussions. I think disability intersects with so many topics and so many ways that kind of we think about the world, and so there's really like very rarely a time when having a disabled person in the room or in the conversation, I think, is not helpful.
Yeah, I could not think of a single time it would not be helpful at this point.
Yeah.
I want to incorporate a question from Turco, who asks if you find the shift in language is generational. Do people of older generations like to be addressed one way compared to younger generations of people? Maybe that's something you can both speak to?
I think that, I mean, definitely things have changed over time. You might know more specifically about this, but I mean, I notice it. I think sometimes it's different within the disability community, but like my mom still uses the word handicapped when she talks to me, and I think that's just like...
It's a generational.
That's a general, like that was the PC term when she was like most kind of absorbed in what was happening, and I mean, this is like, I don't want to speak for all disabled people, but for me it's like, I don't want people to get bogged down in the terminology. Like if you don't say the right phrase, or, you know, it's like, we can work through that kind of stuff. I'd rather like get to the conversation and talk, and like that stuff's gonna happen. Like we're all gonna make mistakes. So like, I would say if anyone's feeling nervous about that, just, yeah.
Don't.
Yeah.
Just like it does, somebody was saying, asking for an icebreaker, and it's the same thing I said at the beginning, which is, if you're uncomfortable, I found it a lot easier to just drop the F-bomb before whatever it is that you're uncomfortable saying, and then like...
It makes us both laugh, so I'm just saying it works.
It helps.
Yeah.
It's definitely an icebreaker.
I think the point of looking at the world with a child's eye is really poignant. I think it's a good way to live life in general.
Yeah.
As a child, you're not told no. You're kind of just open to the world and absorbing it as you see it, and so I think that can be applied here, as well as in a creative pursuit, and so I think that's a really good point to make.
Yeah. I think another thing that I think about a lot, especially with people who are coming to disability in kind of a new, without much experience, is just that there's a lot that's been written about this topic, and so like there's just really a wealth of kind of resources and people who've been thinking about this stuff. And I think if you're feeling nervous going into a conversation with someone, that's a really great way to just kind of get your bearings a little bit.
Yeah.
Is there anyone you want to call out by name in terms? I'm a huge fan of Mia Mingus, so I recommend reading anything that she's written.
Yeah.
Mia Mingus, what is she known for?
She's a writer and advocate. She's written about all sorts of different topics. I love following her on social media. I feel like she has kind of her finger on the pulse of a lot of disability issues.
I think the thing that I've been sort of most profoundly moved by over the course of the last year, and again, you have to understand sort of what a big deal this is, because it's sort of in the mainstream, right? It has so rarely been disabled people speaking about our experience. It's parents, teachers, doctors, social workers that have spoken about us historically. They were perceived as the experts, we were not. And so I think it's been a year and a half now, maybe. The New York Times has a disability op-ed series. So if you type in New York Times disability, you'll see that there's a series of essays written by disabled people that come up, and every single one of them is incredibly powerful. I had the opportunity to write one. I know Emily Liddell wrote one on dating, Alice Wong wrote one on Medicaid, Elizabeth Guffey wrote one on accessibility signage. It's just week after week, it's just they're incredible. And so I think that's a great way to sort of at least understand the tone of the disabled perspective really well. And I'm so grateful that the New York Times has given the mainstream access to these incredible disabled writers.
Yeah.
Thank you, Tim, for the link too.
Yeah, thank you.
Now it's time actually to announce our chat and win winners.
Do we get to pick?
Welcome in just a moment. We've had some really great questions. I feel like we've had a really great conversation going with the chatters here today. I know it's a very interesting topic, and so thank you all for participating, for listening. I know some people said they couldn't listen because they were in a meeting. They could only watch our mouths move. So hopefully you can read our mouths, maybe using sign language. There's also talk about sign language and how there are no captions on YouTube. I know YouTube is starting to work on that kind of accessibility.
Yeah, I think that's another thing too, and I think that might have actually been a mistake on my part, because normally when I enter opportunities to speak, the very first question I ask is there going to be captioning? And so I want to apologize to it's completely on me, because it is an important mode of access. And the thing is, and this is actually an interesting conversation in the disability community, which is, so YouTube does have a means to captioning, but they are auto-generated, and so they're not sort of done by a person. And I think the deaf and low hearing community is much prefers to know that the captioning was done by hand. And so if you ever get the chance and you have YouTube videos, if you can go on and just check the captioning, and you can just go through and make small corrections to, if you just watch your video alongside it, you can make small corrections to the words that they might have gotten wrong. It means a lot to the deaf community, and so I also want to apologize for failing to do that.
There's no reason to apologize, but I do hope that Rosemarie will recognize everything that you've just said, because she's the winner of this wonderful notebook. So congratulations, Rosemarie. Hopefully you got a lesson while also seeing that you won this fabulous prize. I think that it's totally correct that we should be working to help support these communities, and even in small things like adjusting the captions on YouTube is a way that I can participate. Yeah,
but it's also, you have to understand, it's good business. I remember NPR added captions or transcripts to all of their content, and the viewership, listenership went up, I think it was by like 7% over just in a very short period of time. And so
even the person in the meeting from the chat, like that person would have been helped by captions in this scenario.
Eric, I believe that was. Eric could have listened to us via caption. I also went to a school that was 40% deaf, so I learned some sign language. So I was signing, I'm sorry. Other than that, I only know a lot of curse words, and so I'm not helpful in any other way.
But it is interesting to see how over time a lot of like, things that are created, that are intended to create access are broadened, and you can, you can't go through Twitter or Facebook now without seeing that the video has, been captioned because, you know, who wants the volume to autoplay? And so, these are just various ways that you can see that disability has impacted, greater society.
Yeah, definitely. And so, listeners here, chatters, we have a couple more minutes. I want to make sure that you ask any questions you might have. This is a great opportunity to ask any questions you might not be aware of, or maybe we can talk a little bit about how they can get involved in their community. Maybe just in New York City, if I wanted to get involved, what would I actionably do? Would I just email you guys and maybe ask questions? Is that one way of maybe moving forward?
Yeah, I part of me almost wants to just like read off a few Twitter handles of just people who I find incredibly informative. The first I would say is Alice Wong, and her Twitter handle is at DIS visibility, VISIBILIDY. I also like Kim Sauter, and her Twitter name is Crippled Scholar. And again, these aren't necessarily design minds. These are just people who are knee-deep in disability theory, culture, politics, etc. A couple hashtags, Crip the Vote, Say the Word, and I like the Suck it ableism for the straw ban.
Also, Ramp Fail is a good one.
Ramp Fail is a good one.
Fail, nice.
Yeah. And so I think, I just want everybody to understand, like, it's not necessarily, like, we don't want help, we want to be heard. And so it's how can you get to know us and have a conversation with us as peers, and not necessarily seeing us as people who are requiring of charity or support.
Gotcha. Yeah, even the way I worded that could have been conveyed that way, but maybe how can we, as designers?
Yeah, and I think what we're trying to resolve is how do we create a more equitable relationship? Because throughout history, it's always been sort of perceived that disability is a very sort of charitable state of being. And so, I think in my work that constant pushing back helps to shed light on the fact that we have much to offer. We are,
contributors.
Exactly.
Yeah, definitely. And I think there was a question here from Kevin about how to make a brand identity design more accessible for people. I don't know if that's something you can both speak to.
Yeah, do you want to?
Sure, yeah. I mean, I think something that we've been talking about a little bit recently is like having, like, if your brand identity is primarily visual, but also thinking about ways to expand that. So, like, can there be a sound associated with your brand? Can there be a texture associated with your brand, kind of thinking more expansively about what those different brand elements are. I think something I also think about, especially in terms of graphic design and web design, is that making accessibility a priority. I think sometimes designers really want to get in and do something really fancy and new and exciting, but if that's not accessible, that doesn't work. And so, like, really making sure that that's a focus, and that's something that you're thinking about from the beginning of your project, and really building that in. It's much harder to go back in later and be like, okay, wait, so we didn't do that, and now we're trying to retrofit it.
Yeah, and I think also wrapped within that is how do you sort of I think the assumption is that in sort of the brand identity design that you just want to make it, you're only focused on access. And I think the thing that really interests me and that I'm so focused on is how do you wink at or delight whoever might come across your brand that might be disabled? Is there a way that that you can make them feel that you see them and you know them, and you simply are just trying to kind of catch their attention. You're not trying to fix them or anything like that, just sort of acknowledge. And so I think that's always sort of a fun challenge that I try and help brands kind of tackle.
Where have you seen that? Where have you seen someone wink at you with their product? That's a really cool
super
idea.
Story. Mm-hmm. So it's interesting because I'm advocating for a lot for this, and There's a few examples, but I think that the best example I can give, and this is the story I always tell, is there was this amazing story in The Atlantic called How Subarus Became the Car for Lesbians. And it was hilarious. So basically, Subaru realized in the early 90s that lesbians were using their cars. And so they wanted to market to them. And the first thing they did is they put 2 lesbian women in the front seat and a dog in the back seat. And they figured, great representation, lesbians are going to buy Subarus. And they, you know, I think people noticed, they're like, oh, like, you know, Subaru has lesbians in their commercial, but like nothing happened. There was no boost in sales or anything. And so they went back to the drawing table and they decided, we're going to wink at our lesbian consumers. And so they had this perfectly normal commercial. There was nothing noteworthy about it, and except for when the car drove away, on the license plate it said Xena Lover.
Nice.
And it's hilarious because like anybody who was watching it that wasn't sort of aware of lesbian culture, they just thought it was a normal Subaru commercial. But the lesbians saw that and they like, it's hilarious. Like they were like, this is amazing. And it's how Subarus became the car for lesbians. It was that wink, that little nod that it was only there for them, and other people would have sort of overlooked it entirely. And so this is the challenge I have, is how do you really wink at the disability community? And I'll just assure you from the outset that trying to fix us is not a wink, it's the opposite of a wink. And so how do you really reach us? So I'm waiting for that sort of company to do that.
That's an amazing example. I had no idea that they did that. That's fantastic.
It's brilliant, and it's so like it says so much about what people want.
Yeah.
And the other thing that I sort of realize is that, and I don't know who was hired on this campaign, but I figure it's either a gay man or it was, you know, that like, you know, it has like the lesbian jokes up his sleeve, or it was some lesbians, because you need to have your fingers in that community in order to come up with something so clever. And so like it would also be a signal to the disability community that, you know, we were invited to the table.
Yeah, I think nuance is probably the right word, right?
Yeah.
Because it's nuanced into it, just like you both were speaking to earlier today. You want that nuance to be expressed.
Yeah.
Interesting. And so we have only a couple minutes left. What is the last thing you'd want to leave the audience with? What's your final remark or statement that if they could walk away with anything at all from the stream, what would you want it to be? I don't mean to put you on the spot either.
I wrote this as a tweet the other day, and I think it's because so often we're sort of treated with like empathetic gloves, and I wrote, the opposite of empathy isn't apathy, it's mutuality. And so that's what I would want to leave you with, is that I at least am less interested in somebody feeling empathetically about my body or the work that I'm doing, and I would want to see them to see me as equal or a peer.
That's really strong, powerful.
I think for me, maybe it's the last thing. Can I just show one other project that I'm working on right now?
We definitely have time. Yeah.
So I've been working on this collaboration with a friend of mine who's a designer, Gabriel Loeb, thinking about kind of bringing disability aesthetics to typography. So he created this algorithm using different kind of open source JavaScript to manipulate text. And so we've been working with some of the language that I've been working with in my work, like choreography based on my everyday movements, but then going in and kind of manipulating it a little bit. And it's been really fun to think about. A lot of what I do is just using my handwriting, and I really love kind of the way hand-lettered text looks, but it's been really exciting to try to kind of expand that and think about it more typographically.
The humor's coming back. These are really amazing statements.
Yeah, all of the text is from a self-portrait project I've done, where I've kind of pulled out phrases related to thoughts, memories, experiences that I've had, and kind of using those as a self-portrait.
Yeah, and Elle says these are beautiful. I can't help but agree. I think the type is really beautiful as it is, and these statements just make it carry so much more weight, and it's fun and playful. Do we have time for you to show your handwriting? Do you have any of that pulled up?
Yes.
If you have it handy, we can probably pull that up as we're wrapping up the stream. As I said earlier today, we have a lot going on today, so please stay tuned. This has been a really interesting talk for me. And this is some more work from the lovely Shannon. And Liz, have you collaborated with her on any of this stuff?
We're working on something right now.
Nice, awesome. So Liz and Shannon sharing their work here.
Yeah.
And exhibition of all the diagrams my nephrologist drew for me. Nice.
Yeah, so just, yeah, I think, and this kind of goes back to what Liz was saying about specificity. You know, I think sometimes the easiest way for me to communicate about my experience is really to get into these really detailed,
I'm going to keep clicking
moments, and I'm amazed at kind of how people, both disabled and non-disabled, sometimes have kind of moments of resonance with some of these.
Yeah, these are amazing. And so they can find your work online. I think we've been linking all the different projects, and so thank you, Tim, for helping with those links, and Lee. Thank you for all your questions, chatters. This has been really eye-opening for me, and hopefully eye-opening for everyone else as well. These have been some really interesting topics, and it's been really enlightening. I'm really happy that we're doing this today here at Adobe Live for World Interaction Design Day. Thank you for participating.
And thank you for being open to us and willing to ask questions that you may not always be comfortable asking.
Thank you. Yeah, I know it's always a little bit scary sometimes, but be open and ask questions and participate, because I think that's how we can collaborate together and have the opportunity to build some really cool stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So thank you, everyone, and stay tuned. We got some cool stuff coming up, and we'll talk again soon. We'll be back this afternoon with some more streams. Thank you both, ladies. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.